The briefing tent was stifling, the desert heat pressing in from every angle, thick with the smell of sweat, canvas, and stale coffee. Dozens of soldiers sat shoulder to shoulder on folding chairs, rifles slung between their knees, eyes half focused on the map projected on the wall. Most of them weren't really listening to the colonel. They were too busy stealing sips of lukewarm water, swiping dust from their uniforms, or keeping their minds locked on anything but the thought of heading back out on patrol. The colonel, a tall man with silver hair that glinted like steel, had the kind of voice that carried over rotor wash and machine gun fire. He pointed at the map with his swagger stick, his jaw clenched tight. Enemy supply lines here, here, and here. Our job is to cut them off before they regroup. The Raqqa insurgents think they can choke us out of this valley. They're wrong. We're going to box them in, break them, and take their leaders alive. The soldiers shifted, a ripple of unease moving through the tent. Everyone knew the Raqqa weren't cowards. They were ghosts, hard to find, harder to kill, and lethal in ambushes. Near the back of the room, Sergeant First Class Elena Ramirez sat stiffly, sweat rolling down her spine. She wasn't fidgeting like the others. She wasn't whispering under her breath. She sat like stone, her dark eyes fixed on the colonel's face. When he finished his briefing, he let the stick drop to the table, exhaling sharply. Questions. The silence stretched. Then, without warning, the colonel's gaze locked on Ramirez. Sergeant Ramirez, he said, voice sharp. I've seen your name on the no-go PT roster 3 times this week. Excuses, excuses. You've got paperwork citing medical exemption. But everyone else here manages to lace up their boots and run. What's your excuse? The tent went quiet. Soldiers turned, eyes sliding toward Ramirez. Some smirked, others just looked down at their boots. In the army, no one escaped PT scrutiny, not even heroes. Ramirez didn't move at first. Her jaw worked, teeth grinding silently. She had heard this before from officers who didn't know her history, who didn't bother to check beyond the paperwork. But the colonel's words sliced deeper than usual, echoing like an accusation. She stood slowly, her chair scraping the dirt floor. With respect, sir, it's not an excuse. The colonel arched a brow. Then enlighten me. The tent was suffocatingly quiet. Ramirez reached up, unzipped her combat jacket, and pulled it off in one fluid motion. The air hit her skin and so did the eyes. Her arms and shoulders were a latticework of scars, puckered, jagged, and raw even years later. A cluster of shrapnel wounds marked her left side, deep gouges from an IED that had nearly ended her life on a convoy in Kandahar. The scars glistened faintly with sweat, brutal and unflinching in the harsh tent light. You want to know why I can't run 6 miles anymore? She asked, voice hard but steady. Because half the muscle in my leg was shredded pulling private downs out of a burning Humvee. Because I have metal pins holding my hip together. And because the surgeons told me I'd never walk without a cane again. But I don't just walk. I lead. I fight. I carry my rifle and my ruck same as anyone else. I just don't run laps. The silence was absolute. Even the air conditioner unit seemed to falter. The colonel's expression froze for a heartbeat. Then, to his credit, he gave a single sharp nod. Noted, Sergeant. Ramirez zipped her jacket back up, her movements sharp. She sat down, the whispers starting around her. Some were murmurs of respect, others jokes whispered too low to hear. But one thing was certain. Nobody in that tent would ever forget what they'd seen. The patrol. Hours later, the desert sun bled across the horizon, painting the world in gold and blood orange. Ramirez adjusted her helmet strap as she stepped into the motor pool, the heavy scent of diesel and sand swirling around her. Sergeant, you're with Alpha Team today, said Lieutenant Harris, a young officer with the wide-eyed look of someone still learning the difference between strategy and survival. We've got reports of enemy movement along the wadi. We're rolling in 10. Ramirez nodded, slinging her rifle across her chest. Her squad was already gathering. Specialist Kane, the wisecracker from Chicago, Corporal Yates, quiet as a shadow but deadly with a marksman rifle, and Private Jackson, barely 20, still with the baby face of someone who hadn't seen enough yet. Mount up, Ramirez ordered. Check your gear, check your mags. We're not tourists. Kane grinned as he climbed into the MRA. Don't worry, Sarge. I left my camera back at the FOB. Shut up and load your weapon, Ramirez shot back, though the corner of her mouth twitched in the ghost of a smile. The convoy rolled out, engines roaring, dust plumes rising like storm clouds behind them. Inside the vehicle, the air was thick with heat and the nervous chatter of soldiers trying to mask the tension. You think the Raqqa are out there today? Jackson asked, his voice higher than he intended. They're always out there, Yates replied evenly, eyes scanning the horizon through the narrow window slit. The only question is whether they want us bad enough to show their faces. Ramirez said nothing. Her eyes flicked across the landscape, every shadow a potential ambush, every ridge a possible sniper nest. She knew too well what silence before contact felt like. Contact. The convoy slowed as it entered the wadi, the rocky ravine swallowing the sound of their engines. The walls rose steep on both sides, jagged and red. Ramirez's stomach tightened. "This is bad ground," she muttered into her headset. "Too narrow, no cover. Eyes sharp people." They were halfway through when it hit. The first explosion ripped through the lead vehicle, a deafening roar that shook the earth. Flames erupted skyward, smoke billowing into the narrow ravine. Shrapnel pinged off armor, sparks flying. "Ambush!" Ramirez shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Dismount. Return fire." Gunfire cracked from the ridges above. Insurgents appeared like wraiths, firing AKs and RPGs, their shouts echoing through the canyon. Bullets tore into the vehicles, ricocheting with metallic screams. Ramirez hauled Jackson out of the MRAP, shoving him toward cover behind a boulder. "Stay low." Fire-controlled bursts. Kane was already returning fire, his saw roaring as brass casings piled at his feet. Yates dropped to one knee, sighted in, and took a shot. An insurgent crumpled against the rocks, his rifle clattering away. "Alpha status." Harris's panicked voice crackled in the comms. "Leads down, repeat, leads down." Ramirez barked. "We're taking heavy fire from the north ridge. We need suppressive fire now." She leaned out, sighted, and squeezed her trigger. A burst of rounds spat from her M4, driving the enemy back into cover. Her hips screamed in protest, a reminder of old wounds, but she ignored it. Pain was just another battlefield condition. Jackson, cover left. Kane, keep that saw hot. Yates, find me that RPG gunner before he turns us into scrap metal. Her squad moved like gears in a machine, trained instincts kicking in. But the Raqqa weren't amateurs. They pressed the attack, moving with coordination that spoke of discipline and planning. A rocket slammed into the second MRAP, rocking it sideways. The blast wave knocked Ramirez against the boulder, her ears ringing. She tasted blood. "Enemies trying to pin us down." Kane yelled over the gunfire. "Not happening," Ramirez growled. She toggled her radio. "This is Alpha. We're pinned in the wadi, 2 vehicles down. Request immediate air support." "Negative," came the cold reply from command. "Birds are tied up on another op. You're on your own for now." Ramirez's stomach sank, but she didn't let it show. Her squad was watching, waiting. Leadership wasn't about having no fear, it was about hiding it well enough that others could keep fighting. "All right," she said, voice calm despite the chaos. "We're going to push west, flank their position and clear a path out." Kane, lay down suppressive fire. Yates, pick targets and keep them ducked. Jackson, on me. We move on my mark. Bullets hissed past, one clipping the rock inches from her helmet. She took a deep breath, the kind that steadied nerves before hell broke loose. "Mark." They surged forward, rifles blazing, feet pounding the rocky ground. The insurgents shouted, surprised by the sudden push. Grenades exploded against the ridge, smoke and dust clouding the air. Ramirez felt her lungs burning, her legs screaming, but she didn't stop. She pushed, always forward, because if she stopped, if she faltered, the whole squad would crumble. She spotted the RPG gunner reloading on the ridge. Without hesitation, she dropped to one knee, sighted, and fired. The round struck true, the man collapsing backward, the launcher tumbling from his hands. "Clear the ridge," Ramirez shouted. Alpha stormed the slope, boots slipping on loose rock, bullets snapping overhead. They reached the crest in a burst of chaos, gunfire, shouting, the acrid sting of cordite thick in the air. When it was over, when the last Raqqa fell silent, Ramirez stood breathing hard, sweat and blood mingling on her face. The canyon below was littered with smoke, wreckage, and the echoes of battle. Aftermath. Hours later, under the fading light of dusk, the squad regrouped by the smoking husk of their vehicles. The wounded were being stabilized, the dead covered with ponchos. Silence hung heavy. Lieutenant Harris approached Ramirez, his face pale, his hands trembling as he held his helmet. "Sergeant, you saved us. If you hadn't—" "Don't finish that sentence, sir," Ramirez said flatly, wiping grime from her face. "We lost 2 vehicles and 3 good soldiers. Nobody got saved today. We just didn't all die." Harris swallowed hard, nodding. He looked young again, like a boy in a uniform too big for him. Kane limped over, grinning despite a bandage on his arm. "Hey, Sarge." Next time you want to charge uphill into gunfire, maybe give us a heads up first. Ramirez managed a tight smile. What, and ruin the surprise? A ripple of laughter, strained but real, broke through the squad. Even in hell, humor was the only thing that kept them human. As night fell and the medevac birds finally came, Ramirez stood apart, watching the dark horizon. She could feel the colonel's words from earlier echoing in her chest. The mockery, the doubt, the challenge. She had answered them the only way she knew how, not with excuses, not with scars, but with action. And she knew this was only the beginning. The desert night was colder than most expected. Soldiers bundled in their jackets, breath fogging in the air, while the remnants of the convoy sat smoldering in the wadi like the bones of giants. The medevac helicopters had come and gone, their rotors leaving only silence behind. Silence and the heavy weight of loss. Sergeant Elena Ramirez stood on the ridge, helmet tucked under her arm, staring down at the wreckage. She felt the ache in her hip more sharply in the cold, the old shrapnel wounds throbbing. She ignored it as always. Pain was familiar, pain was expected. What she couldn't ignore were the 3 poncho-covered bodies waiting to be carried back to base. Private Jackson stood nearby, his face pale, eyes fixed on the dark desert beyond. He was still clutching his rifle like it might disappear if he let go. Ramirez watched him out of the corner of her eye. The kid hadn't spoken since the firefight ended. "You did good today," Ramirez said quietly. Jackson startled, blinking at her. I froze. When the lead vehicle blew, I didn't even move. You had to drag me. You didn't run, Ramirez countered. That's the difference. The first time you see combat, freezing is normal. Running gets people killed. You stayed. That's what matters. Jackson swallowed hard, nodding. His hands still trembled on the rifle grip. Does it ever stop feeling like that? The noise, the smoke, the smell of... No, Ramirez said simply. But you get used to fighting through it. You learn to move anyway. He didn't reply. She didn't press him. The battlefield had a way of shaping soldiers, either into steel or into cracks. Time would tell which way Jackson bet. Back at the FOB. By dawn, Alpha Team was back at Forward Operating Base Ryder. The gates clanged shut behind the convoy, and mechanics swarmed the surviving vehicles. Medics moved the wounded on stretchers, their boots crunching on gravel. The sun rose, bright and merciless, burning away the chill of night and replacing it with the suffocating heat of another day. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the colonel stood over a new map. His jaw was tight, his voice sharper than the desert wind. You were ambushed in the wadi. We've seen it before. The Raqqa know our routes and they're exploiting them. I told higher command weeks ago we needed more UAV coverage, but apparently they think we can handle it. He slammed his fist against the table. Well, now we've got 3 more names to add to the wall. Ramirez stood with the rest of Alpha, helmet under her arm. Dust streaked her face and her uniform was stiff with dried sweat. She wasn't interested in speeches. She wanted answers. Sir, she said. The Raqqa knew we were coming. That ambush wasn't random, it was set. Someone's feeding them intel. The colonel's gaze snapped to her, eyes narrowing. That's a serious accusation, Sergeant. It's the truth, Ramirez replied flatly. They knew the exact route, the timing, even where to place the RPGs. That doesn't happen without inside information. The room went still. The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between them. The colonel studied her for a long moment, then exhaled through his nose. You may be right. But until we have proof, watch your words. Morale's already bleeding. We can't afford suspicion spreading through the ranks. Ramirez didn't argue, though her jaw clenched. She wasn't wrong and she knew it. But she also knew the colonel was right about one thing. Rumors could fracture a unit faster than bullets. The barracks. That night, Ramirez lay on her cot in the dim barracks, the hum of generators in the distance. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the ambush in her head. Every flash, every scream, every body hitting the dirt. She could still smell the burning diesel and blood. Across the room, Kane sat polishing his saw, humming tunelessly. Yates was scribbling in a small notebook, always quiet, always focused. Jackson lay on his bunk, staring at the wall, eyes wide open. You good, Private? Ramirez asked softly. Jackson didn't move at first. Then after a long pause he whispered, they screamed. The guys in the lead vehicle. I can still hear them. Ramirez sat up, swinging her legs over the side. Her hip protested but she ignored it. You'll always hear them, she said. That doesn't go away. What matters is what you do with it. You let it paralyze you or you use it to make damn sure it doesn't happen again. Jackson turned, his face pale in the dim light. How do you live with it? Ramirez met his eyes. One day at a time. Orders. 2 days later, orders came down. Alpha Team was to accompany a resupply convoy through the Western Pass. It was supposed to be routine, trucks loaded with food, ammo, and fuel. But after the ambush in the Wadi, nobody believed in routine anymore. The morning of departure, Ramirez inspected her squad. Gear squared away, weapons loaded, helmets strapped tight. Kane was cracking jokes, Yates was silent as always, and Jackson looked like he hadn't slept in days. Eyes up, heads on a swivel, Ramirez said. The Raqqa don't give second chances. We do this clean, we do this smart, and we all come home. Kane smirked. You sound like my mom before I left for prom. Ramirez shot him a look. If I have to be your mom to keep you alive, then shut up and listen. The convoy rolled out under the blazing sun, dust clouds trailing behind. Ramirez rode in the lead, MRAP headset crackling with comms chatter. The road stretched empty ahead, the desert endless and silent. For hours nothing happened. Just the grind of engines, the rattle of gear, and the endless monotony of the desert. The soldiers grew restless, nerves stretched taut. Then Yates' voice came over the radio. Movement. 2 o'clock. Ridge line. Ramirez lifted her binoculars, scanning. A flicker of shadow, a flash of metal. She felt her stomach drop. Contact front, she shouted. Gunfire erupted from the ridge. Bullets hammered the convoy, sparks flying off armor. Soldiers scrambled for cover, rifles spitting back. The resupply trucks lurched forward, drivers panicked, engines roaring. Ambush. Ramirez barked. Dismount. Return fire. Kane's saw opened up, the thunderous roar cutting through the chaos. Yates took precise shots, each one finding its mark. Jackson stumbled out of the MRAP, hit the dirt, and fired wildly, rounds kicking up dust. Hold the line. Ramirez shouted, her voice steady even as bullets hissed past. Protect those trucks. An RPG streaked toward the convoy, slamming into a fuel truck. The explosion lit up the desert, flames billowing skyward. The blast wave knocked soldiers off their feet, the heat searing their skin. Trucks hit, someone screamed. Get the drivers out. Ramirez ordered. She sprinted through the chaos, dragging a dazed soldier from the burning wreckage. Her legs screamed in protest, but she didn't stop. The fire roared behind her, heat licking her back. She shoved the soldier toward cover, then turned back. Jackson was frozen near the flames, staring at the inferno. Move, Private. Ramirez shouted. He didn't move. The fire reflected in his wide eyes, the screams of the burning truck crew pinning him in place. Without hesitation, Ramirez charged, grabbing him by the collar and hauling him back. Bullets snapped around them, the heat scorching their faces. She shoved him down behind a boulder, fury in her voice. You freeze again, you're dead. And worse, your team's dead. Do you understand me? Jackson gasped for air, nodding frantically. The firefight raged on. The Raqqa pressed hard, disciplined, coordinated. But Alpha held. Kane laid down a wall of suppressive fire, Yates dropped targets with surgical precision, and Ramirez kept moving, shouting, pulling, pushing, refusing to let the squad crack. Finally, the insurgents broke, retreating into the desert. The gunfire faded, replaced by the crackle of flames and the groans of the wounded. Ramirez stood in the smoke, chest heaving, rifle hot in her hands. The convoy was battered, one truck destroyed, several soldiers wounded, but alive. She turned to her squad, her voice hoarse but steady. That's 2 ambushes in less than a week. Someone's feeding them intel. And if command won't find the mole, we will. The question of trust. Back at the FOB, tension rippled through the ranks. Whispers spread like wildfire, traitors, spies, informants. Soldiers eyed each other with suspicion, conversations hushed when new faces walked in. In the barracks, Kane leaned against his bunk, shaking his head. 2 ambushes, 2 routes compromised. Sarge, you're right. Somebody's talking. Yates closed his notebook, eyes sharp. Or somebody's listening. Comms could be tapped. Or maybe it's higher up, someone with access to movement orders. Jackson sat on his bunk, staring at the floor. What if it's one of us? The room went quiet. Ramirez studied him, then the others. It doesn't matter who it is yet. What matters is that we don't let it tear us apart. The Raqqa want us paranoid, doubting each other. That's how units fall. We don't give them that satisfaction. Kane smirked. So what do we do? Play detective between firefights. Ramirez's eyes hardened. If that's what it takes. Midnight. That night, Ramirez couldn't sleep. She sat outside the barracks, the desert wind carrying the faint smell of smoke from distant villages. The stars stretched endlessly above, cold and brilliant. She thought about the colonel's words, about the suspicion eating at the unit, about the soldiers she'd pulled from fire and wreckage. And she thought about the scars she carried, not just on her body but inside. A shadow moved behind her. She turned, hand on her rifle. It was Yates. "You're not wrong," he said quietly, stepping into the moonlight. "There's a leak. And if we don't find it, more of us will die." Ramirez studied him. His face was unreadable, his eyes calm. "You volunteering to help me root it out?" she asked. Yates nodded. "Somebody has to." Ramirez looked back at the horizon, the endless desert that held both enemies and answers. Her scars ached in the cold, a reminder of past battles. "This war isn't just out there," she murmured. "It's in here too. And if we don't fight it, we'll lose before we ever step outside the wire." The wind howled, carrying sand across the base, erasing footprints in moments. But the weight of suspicion, of betrayal lingered, something no wind could sweep away. And Ramirez knew the next fight was already coming. The days after the convoy ambush were uneasy. The FOB seemed quieter than usual, though in reality, it was busier than ever. Trucks coming and going, mechanics working overtime, medics patching wounds, and comms officers shouting into radios that always seemed one step behind the battlefield. But beneath it all ran an undercurrent, an invisible current of suspicion. Soldiers glanced at one another too long, conversations broke off mid-sentence, and even laughter felt forced. Sergeant Elena Ramirez felt it most keenly in her squad. Kane was still cracking jokes, but his humor had a bitter edge now. Jackson barely spoke at all, carrying guilt like a rucksack heavier than his rifle. Yates, always quiet, now watched everyone with a sharpness that made some nervous. Ramirez herself tried to keep them focused, but she could feel the tension like static in the air. The colonel called another briefing. His voice was hard, clipped, and the lines around his eyes seemed deeper. 2 ambushes in 1 week. 2 routes compromised. Higher command is finally listening. We're tightening comms, restricting movement orders, and limiting who sees patrol routes. Until we find the leak, everything stays need to know. That means fewer people in the loop and tighter control. Ramirez stood in the back, arms crossed, her mind working. Fewer people in the loop would help, but if the mole was high enough, it wouldn't matter. And every day they didn't find the leak meant more soldiers and body bags. A whisper in the dark. That night, Ramirez was on the outer wall, staring out at the desert. The moon cast silver light over the endless sand. She heard footsteps approach, light, deliberate. "Couldn't sleep?" Yates asked, coming to stand beside her. "Never can after a fight," Ramirez replied. Yates nodded, folding his arms on the barrier. "I've been watching. The leak's not coming from grunts. Too low level. Most of them don't even know where they're going until they're in the trucks." "You think it's someone higher?" "I think it's someone with access to orders before they're cut." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, but there was steel underneath. "Which means staff. Maybe intel, maybe even someone in TOC." Ramirez exhaled slowly. "If that's true, we're not just fighting Raqqa. We're fighting ghosts inside our own wire." Yates glanced at her. "You willing to hunt them?" She met his gaze. "I don't know how to do anything else." Patrol. 2 days later, Alpha was back out. The orders were vague: escort engineers to check a bridge rumored to be mined. Simple, straightforward. But Ramirez had stopped believing in simple. The convoy rolled through the desert, engines humming, sun blazing overhead. Ramirez rode in the second vehicle, scanning the horizon. Yates was beside her, rifle across his knees. Halfway to the bridge, her headset crackled. "Eagle 1, this is TOC. Change of route. Head north, grid coordinates Sierra 17. Intel suggests enemy activity near the dry riverbed." Ramirez frowned. Change of route. Mid-patrol. Exactly the kind of thing the Raqqa would expect if someone was feeding them intel. She keyed her mic. "This is Alpha. Confirm reroute?" "Over." "Affirmative. North to Sierra 17. Ramirez exchanged a glance with Yates. His expression didn't change, but she saw the flicker in his eyes. "Roger that," she said into the mic, but her gut twisted. The convoy turned north. The desert stretched flat and empty, but the silence was wrong. Too heavy. Too expectant. Then the world exploded. An IED buried under the sand ripped apart the lead vehicle, flipping it end over end in a fireball. The shockwave slammed into Ramirez's MRAP, knocking her against the armor, ears ringing. "Ambush!" she roared, even as gunfire erupted from both sides. Raqqa fighters poured from shallow trenches, rifles blazing. Bullets rattled against the convoy, glass shattering. Kane saw thundered, spitting brass. Jackson fired wildly, panic etched across his face. Yates was calm, precise, his rifle cracking methodically. Ramirez forced the door open, dragging Jackson into cover behind the vehicle. "Get your head straight," she barked. "We're not dying here." The firefight raged. The Raqqa had them boxed in, firing from concealed positions. Another rocket slammed into a truck, sending soldiers scrambling. The engineers dove for cover, unarmed, shouting in panic. "Alpha status." Harris's voice came over the comms, frantic. "2 vehicles down, heavy contact." Ramirez shouted. "We're pinned. Request immediate QRF." "Negative," came the reply. "QRF is 20 minutes out. Hold your position." 20 minutes. They wouldn't last 10. Ramirez's mind raced. They were boxed, pinned, and bleeding. "Unless—" "Yates," she shouted. "See that ridge to the west? That's their flank. We take it, we break them." Yates nodded once. "On you." Kane suppressed that trench. "Jackson with me." The 3 of them sprinted across open sand, bullets snapping past. Kane saw roared, laying down a curtain of fire. Ramirez's hips screamed with every stride, but she pushed harder, dragging Jackson along when he faltered. They hit the ridge, scrambled up, and came down on the Raqqa's flank like a hammer. Ramirez fired in controlled bursts, dropping 2 fighters. Yates took another with a clean headshot. Jackson, trembling, managed to cut down a man reloading. The insurgents panicked, turning their fire toward the ridge. That gave the convoy room to breathe. Kane saw chewed through their defenses, the engineers grabbing rifles from fallen men and firing desperately. 10 brutal minutes later, the Raqqa broke, scattering into the desert. The silence afterward was deafening. Aftermath. Smoke curled from burning vehicles. Medics scrambled, tending to the wounded. The smell of cordite and blood clung to the air. Ramirez stood in the wreckage, chest heaving, sweat and dust streaking her face. Harris stumbled over, helmet askew. "Sergeant, you saved us." Again. Ramirez shook her head. "We shouldn't have been out here in the first place. That reroute wasn't random. They knew we'd come this way." Harris swallowed hard, eyes darting. "You think?" "I know," Ramirez cut him off. "We've got 'em all. And if command won't admit it, I'll prove it." The plan. Back at the FOB, Ramirez gathered her squad in the barracks. Kane sat on his bunk, arm bandaged but still grinning. Yates leaned against the wall, silent. Jackson sat stiffly, his rifle across his lap. "Listen up," Ramirez said. "We've been hit 3 times. Always too clean, too fast. That doesn't happen unless the enemy knows our moves. There's a mole in this base." Kane whistled low. "Hell of a claim, Sarge." "It's not a claim," Ramirez said. "It's a fact. And we're going to smoke them out." Jackson looked uneasy. "How? We can't just accuse people." "We don't accuse," Ramirez said. "We test. Next op, we feed false intel. Different versions to different people. See which one gets us hit. Then we know who's talking." Kane grinned. "Like baiting a rat." Yates finally spoke. "Dangerous. If the Raqqa get wind of even one false lead, soldiers could die." Ramirez's eyes hardened. "Soldiers are already dying. If we don't stop this, more will. I won't let that happen." False orders. The plan was simple in theory. 3 patrol routes. Only one was real. Ramirez ensured that each one went through a different officer in TOC. If the Raqqa struck the false routes, they'd know where the leak came from. The night before the test, Ramirez sat alone in the motor pool, staring at the armored trucks under the floodlights. She ran her fingers over the scars on her arm, old wounds from another war, another betrayal. She remembered the colonel mocking her scars, remembered proving herself again and again. She whispered to the desert night, "Let this work." The trap. The next day the convoy rolled out on the real route, quiet, uneventful. Ramirez rode with her squad, every muscle tense, waiting for the trap to spring. But nothing happened. They reached their checkpoint, completed their mission, and returned without a shot fired. But on the return, word came over the radio. Convoy Bravo ambushed near Hill 402. Heavy contact, multiple casualties. Ramirez's heart clenched. Bravo had been assigned one of the false routes. The trap had worked. But the cost was blood. Confrontation. Back at the FOB, the air was electric. Soldiers whispered, shouted, demanded answers. The colonel stormed into the TOC, fury etched on his face. "Someone fed the Raqqa bad intel," he growled. We set a trap and they took the bait. That means someone in this base is a traitor. And I swear to God we will find them. Ramirez stood at the back, silent. She had her proof now. But proof without a name was useless. And whoever the mole was, they were smart. Careful. Hidden. That night, as she sat on her bunk, Yates approached. He held his notebook, the one he always scribbled in. He handed it to her without a word. Ramirez opened it. Inside were pages of observations, times, dates, details. And one name underlined again and again. Her stomach turned cold. The name wasn't a staff officer. It wasn't intel. It wasn't anyone she expected. It was Lieutenant Harris. The wait. Ramirez closed the notebook slowly, her hands steady though her blood ran hot. Harris, the young officer, the one who had looked to her for guidance, the one who had stammered gratitude after every fight. Could it be true? Or was Yates wrong? She looked at Yates. His face was unreadable. "You're sure?" she asked. "As sure as I can be without catching him in the act," Yates said. Ramirez exhaled, the weight pressing down on her. If Harris was the mole, turning him in without proof could backfire. And if he wasn't, if Yates was wrong, she'd destroy a man's career and fracture her squad. But if Yates was right and she did nothing, more soldiers would die. She looked around the barracks, Kane joking with Jackson, trying to lighten the kid's mood, Jackson staring at the floor, haunted, Yates standing still as stone. Her squad, her responsibility. The war outside was brutal enough. But now Ramirez realized the deadliest fight might be inside the wire. And she had no idea who she could truly trust. The desert night was black velvet stitched with faint stars. No sound carried but the crunch of boots on gravel and the occasional jingle of gear. Lieutenant Colonel Harper moved like a shadow through the scrub, her rucksack heavy but manageable, the weight and anchor that kept her grounded in the chaos. Every step forward meant her team was one step closer to the extraction point. But in the pit of her stomach, something twisted. The air felt too still, too watchful. Years of experience had trained her gut to whisper warnings before her brain could articulate them. Tonight, her instincts screamed louder than ever. "Ma'am," Sergeant Vega murmured as he caught up, his breath forming faint clouds in the cold night air. "You've been scanning R6 for the last half-mile. Something chewing at you?" Harper didn't slow her pace. "Yeah. Feels like we're being followed. I don't like how quiet it's been since the last contact. Taliban don't just give up." Corporal Maddox, trudging just behind with the comms pack, grunted. "Maybe they got sick of losing guys and decided we're not worth it. Or maybe," Harper shot back without turning, "they're drawing us into something worse. Don't assume an enemy with less tech is stupid. That kind of arrogance gets people killed." Her words clipped like rifle fire, and Maddox went silent. Even Vega gave her a sidelong glance, half respect, half caution. Harper's moods were unpredictable since the convoy ambush, her body stitched with scars but her will sharper than ever. She wasn't interested in sugarcoating reality for anyone. The squad trudged onward, 8 strong. Each one carried fatigue like a second skin, but Harper knew they trusted her to guide them through. Trust was the only currency left out here. The warning. An hour later, the terrain narrowed into a dried riverbed, walls of sandstone hemming them in. The moon offered just enough light to see the shifting shadows. Harper called a halt and crouched low, running her gloved fingers through the sand. She found small depressions. Not natural. Tracks. "Fresh," she whispered. "Boot prints. Not ours." Sergeant Vega knelt beside her, studying them. "Could be locals passing through." Harper shook her head. "Too organized. Parallel spacing, multiple individuals, all heading north, same direction as us." She straightened, adrenaline spiking. "Ambush ahead. Spread out. Stay off the center line." The soldiers moved without hesitation. Even Maddox didn't argue. They trusted Harper's instincts now. The scars she carried were proof she'd seen more than any manual could teach. As they crept forward along the edges of the dry channel, silence pressed heavy. Every footstep sounded like thunder in Harper's ears. She raised her fist, signaling stop. There it was. A faint click. Metal against metal. Not a rock slide. Not an animal. A human hand had just primed a weapon. "Down?" Harper hissed. The night exploded. The ambush. Muzzle flashes lit the canyon walls like a strobe. Bullets chewed into sand and stone, sparks flaring where rounds struck rock. Contact front. 50 meters. Vega roared, diving to the left. Harper dropped flat, her rifle snapping up. Through her scope, she caught a silhouette ducking behind a boulder. Controlled squeeze. Crack. The figures slumped, weapon clattering. The air filled with the metallic scream of gunfire. Shouts in Pashto echoed between the canyon walls. Harper's squad responded in kind, disciplined bursts cutting through the chaos. Flank left. Maddox, get that comms up. Harper barked, crawling forward to a better position. Her body screamed protest, shrapnel wounds tugging like old ghosts, but pain was an old companion. Ignored, compartmentalized, weaponized. Comms are jammed. Maddox yelled back, panic edging his voice. They're blocking us. Then make yourself useful and shoot straight. Vega snapped, popping up to send a grenade arcing into the enemy's cover. The explosion rocked the canyon, dust and screams mingling in the aftermath. But the enemy didn't retreat. They poured fire downrange, disciplined and relentless. Harper's heart clenched. These weren't just local fighters with rusted rifles. This was coordinated. Trained. Someone had been preparing for them. A dangerous choice. Pinned behind a rock, Harper glanced at Vega. We can't sit here. They'll box us in. Vega nodded grimly. Options. Split the squad. Half suppress, half flank. That's risky, ma'am. We're already outnumbered. Harper's jaw tightened. Every choice here meant someone could die. But indecision guaranteed it. Risk is what we're paid for, she said coldly. Then louder, second fire team on me. Suppression. First fire team, Vega leads the flank right. Move when I give the signal. Vega hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. Trust. That was all that kept them moving forward. Harper raised her rifle, unleashed a rapid string of shots, then shouted, "Go!" Vega's team darted out, firing in controlled bursts as they sprinted along the canyon edge. Enemy rounds sparked around them. Harper kept up her fire, each shot precise, covering their advance. Her shoulder ached, old scar tissue tearing with every recoil, but she didn't flinch. Pain didn't get a vote. Close quarters. Moments later, Vega's team disappeared into the darkness of the flank route. Harper's squad held steady, bullets cracking overhead, sand stinging her eyes. She shifted her aim, spotted two figures repositioning on higher ground, and dropped them both before they could sight her team. Then silence. A gap in the enemy's rhythm. Now. Harper barked, pushing her team forward. They surged up the riverbed, moving from cover to cover. Suddenly, a figure lunged from the shadows, AK raised. Harper reacted before thought, swinging her rifle like a club. The stock cracked into the man's jaw with a sickening crunch. He went down hard, groaning. Breath ragged, Harper slammed her boot into his chest, pinning him. She leveled her rifle at his head. But his eyes were wide, terrified, barely more than a kid. Her finger froze on the trigger. "Ma'am?" Maddox shouted, firing past her at another attacker. "We don't have time." Harper's chest heaved. For a split second, compassion warred with survival. Then she shifted her aim and fired, not at the kid but at the shadow moving behind him. The boy flinched, then bolted into the night, stumbling over rocks as he vanished. Maddox gave her a look, half confusion, half judgment. Harper ignored it. She didn't owe him an explanation. Not yet. Turning the tide. Gunfire erupted from the flank. Vega's team had reached the enemy's side. Automatic bursts shredded the ambushers' position. Caught between two angles, the fighters faltered. Harper seized the moment. "Push forward," she roared, rising to her feet. She sprinted up the riverbed, her squad following, laying down fire as they advanced. The enemy line crumbled under the assault, survivors scattering into the rocks. Moments later, silence reclaimed the canyon. Only the ringing in Harper's ears remained. "Clear." Vega called from the ridge, his voice hoarse but triumphant. Harper dropped to one knee, chest heaving, sweat mixing with desert dust on her face. Her hands trembled from adrenaline, but she forced them steady as she reloaded. They had survived. But survival was not victory. Aftermath. The squad regrouped, 8 still standing, though not unscathed. Private Torres clutched his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. Vega knelt to wrap it with a pressure bandage, his face grim. "Could have been worse," Vega muttered, eyes scanning the shadows. "They almost had us boxed." Harper nodded. "Which means they knew our route. Someone fed them intel. That landed like a stone in the squad's stomach. Betrayal was a poison that could kill slower, and surer, than bullets." Maddox finally broke the silence. "So what now? Extraction's still 6 clicks away. And if they jammed our comms once, they can do it again." Harper stood, towering despite her exhaustion. Her gaze swept over the squad, hard but steady. "Now we adapt. No straight routes, no predictable movements. We zig when they expect us to zag. And we keep moving until we're on that bird. Understood. A chorus of weary but firm voices answered, "Yes, ma'am." The weight of command. As the squad prepared to move, Vega caught Harper's arm. His voice dropped low just for her. "You had a clean shot back there. That kid you let run. You sure about that call?" Harper's jaw tightened. He wasn't holding the rifle steady. He froze. He wasn't ready to be out here. Killing him wouldn't have changed the fight. "Maybe," Vega said softly. "But if he comes back tomorrow with a bomb strapped to his chest?" Harper's throat felt raw. The question hung heavy without an answer. "Then that's on me," she said finally. "Every decision has weight. I'll carry this one." Vega studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Not agreement, but respect. The silent march. They moved again, cutting cross-country through jagged terrain. The moonlight was fading, clouds swallowing the stars. Every shadow seemed alive, every gust of wind a whisper of danger. But Harper pressed forward, shoulders squared, leading with unshakable resolve. Her squad followed, bound together by the fire they'd just endured. In the silence, Harper's mind replayed the battle. The boy's terrified eyes. The precision of the ambush. The way her scars ached like warnings carved into her skin. Something larger was moving behind the curtain of this war. And she was walking straight into it. For the first time in years, Harper allowed herself a fleeting thought. Maybe my scars aren't just reminders of what I've survived. Maybe they're maps pointing toward what's coming. The horizon was still black when Harper called another halt. The squad huddled in the jagged ruins of an abandoned outpost, its mud brick walls half-eaten by time and gunfire. The desert's chill seeped into their bones. They were 6 clicks from extraction, but each kilometer felt like an ocean. And Harper knew oceans could drown men long before they reached the other shore. Sergeant Vega leaned against the crumbling wall, scanning the distance with night vision goggles. "Nothing moving," he reported. "But that's the problem. Nothing's moving anywhere. Like the whole valley's holding its breath." Harper crouched, pulling out a dog-eared map marked with grease pencil lines. Her finger traced their planned route. "We can't risk the main trail anymore. They knew about it. Which means we're cutting Crossridge through here." She tapped a section of uneven elevation lines. Corporal Maddox, sweat-streaked and pale, frowned. "That's goat path country. If someone gets hurt on that climb, we'll never make it to the bird in time." Harper's eyes locked on him, sharp as broken glass. "You got a better idea?" Maddox hesitated, then shook his head. "Good," Harper said. "Because hesitation kills faster than bullets." A rift among them. As they prepared to move, Private Torres sat against the wall, his wounded arm bandaged but stiff. He looked up at Harper, his face drawn. "Ma'am, permission to speak?" "Granted. With respect. I don't think I can keep pace. Not without slowing the whole squad." Vega glanced at Harper, waiting. The decision was hers. Every fiber in Harper screamed at the unfairness of it. Torres had fought hard in the ambush. He didn't deserve to be left behind. But the hard truth was gnawing in her skull. An injured soldier slowed everyone, and slowing meant death for all. She crouched, eye level with him. "You're still carrying your rifle?" Torres nodded. "Then you're still useful," Harper said. Her voice softened a fraction. "We leave no one behind unless they're in the ground. That's not just army talk, that's my talk. You fall behind, we carry you. Clear?" Torres swallowed hard, relief flickering in his eyes. "Clear, ma'am." But Maddox muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the squad to hear, "Carrying dead weight gets people killed." The words hung like poison. Several soldiers shifted uneasily. Harper's jaw clenched. Maddox was smart, skilled, but his cynicism spread like wildfire if left unchecked. She stood, towering over him. "You got something to say, Maddox? Say it to me." Maddox met her gaze, defiant. "Yeah. I'm saying your compassion is gonna bury us all. You let that kid run last night. Now you want to drag a cripple through goat trails? This isn't leadership, ma'am. It's wishful thinking." The squad froze, every eye darting between them. Harper stepped closer, her voice a razor. "You think leadership is making easy calls? Anyone can do that. Leadership is making the calls that cut you open inside and still standing to face your men after. You don't like my orders? File a complaint when we get home, if you're alive to do it. Until then, shut your damn mouth and follow me." Maddox's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Tension crackled in the air like static. Vega broke it with a cough. "We moving or waiting for dawn to kill us?" Harper nodded. "Move." The goat path. The squad climbed. Loose stones clattered under boots, scraping sounds echoing in the pre-dawn stillness. Their breath came ragged, every muscle screaming under the weight of packs and weapons. Harper led from the front, each step a reminder of her scars pulling beneath her uniform. Every climb threatened to rip old wounds open, but she forced her body forward. If she showed weakness, even for a heartbeat, Maddox's doubt might spread. Torres stumbled twice, nearly pitching backward, but Vega grabbed him each time without a word. The silent loyalty between soldiers spoke louder than speeches ever could. Halfway up, Harper froze. She raised a fist. The squad dropped low. Her ears strained. Their faint clicking. Not rifles. Radios. Up ahead, Harper whispered. They're waiting at the ridge line. Maddox hissed, we're walking into another kill box. No, Harper said, scanning the terrain. Not if we flip it. The trap. The plan formed in seconds, sharp and brutal. Vega, take Maddox and Parker, circle left along that ledge. You'll hit them from the side once they open up. I'll lead the rest straight through. Maddox blinked. You're using yourself as bait? Harper smirked grimly. Congratulations, Corporal. You finally caught up. Now move. Vega didn't argue. He signaled his 2 men and vanished into the shadows of the cliff face. The rest of the squad followed Harper upward, slow and steady, rifles ready. The air grew taut, humming with tension. Then the world detonated. Gunfire ripped across the ridge, muzzle flashes like lightning. Bullets sparked off rock inches from Harper's head. Contact front. Her squad hit the dirt, returning fire in disciplined bursts. Harper rolled behind a boulder, heart hammering, eyes scanning. Enemy silhouettes darted among the rocks above. Too many, too well positioned. They were pinned. Again. Then Vega's team struck. Gunfire erupted from the flank, shredding the ambushers' position. Caught in a crossfire, the enemy faltered. Push. Push. Harper bellowed, surging forward. She fired on the move, each round deliberate. Her squad followed, roaring as adrenaline drowned fear. The fight was savage, close. Shadows lunged from rocks, rifles snapping at point-blank range. Harper drove her bayonet into one man's chest, yanked it free, spun to drop another with 2 quick shots. Blood sprayed, hot and metallic in the cold air. Within minutes, silence fell. Bodies littered the ridge, rifles cooling in the dust. The radio. Vega emerged, breathing hard, smoke curling from his rifle. Clear. Harper wiped grit from her face, her chest heaving. They had won, but at a price. Private Collins lay still, blood pooling under his helmet, eyes glassy and unblinking. Harper knelt, closing his eyes with her gloved hand. Her jaw clenched until it hurt. She wanted to scream, but all she said was, "Pack him. We're not leaving him here." As the squad gathered Collins' body, Maddox called from the rocks. "Ma'am, you'll want to see this." Harper strode over, boots crunching. Maddox knelt by a dead fighter holding a radio set, sleek, modern, far too advanced for local militia. "This isn't Taliban issue," Maddox said. "This is NATO grade." The words hit Harper like a hammer. Her stomach twisted. Which means someone's supplying them. Or someone doesn't want us making it home. The squad exchanged uneasy glances. Betrayal had stopped being a theory. It was now a certainty. The sky turns red. They moved again, slower now, with Collins' body carried on a stretcher. The first light of dawn bled over the mountains, staining the sky red, the color of wounds not yet healed. Exhaustion gnawed at them, but Harper forced her voice steady. 2 clicks left. Birds waiting. Stay sharp. The squad trudged on, boots dragging through dust. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the desert itself wanted to claim them. Then a low rumble rolled across the valley. Not thunder. Engines. Harper whipped out her binoculars. Down in the valley, trucks were moving fast, technicals bristling with mounted guns. Dust plumes trailed them like scars across the earth. "They're cutting us off," Vega said grimly. Harper's mind raced. No time to run. No place to hide. She lowered the binoculars, face set in stone. "Then we make our stand here." The stand. The squad scrambled into defensive positions along the ridge, stacking rocks for cover, weapons loaded and ready. The air buzzed with dread, but Harper's voice cut through like steel. "We hold until the bird comes. We don't break. We don't run. And if anyone here thinks today's the day they die, then you make damn sure you take a few with you." Nervous chuckles rippled, brittle but real. Even humor was a weapon in moments like this. The trucks roared closer, engines snarling, fighters shouting as they dismounted. The ridge lit up with gunfire. Bullets tore the air, smacking into rocks, showering the squad with shards of stone. Harper fired back, every shot methodical, each squeeze of the trigger a choice between life and death. She shouted orders, her voice hoarse but unyielding. Shift fire left. Maddox, grenades, now. The squad fought like cornered wolves. Explosions rocked the valley, screams mingling with the rattle of gunfire. The sun crested the horizon, spilling light on chaos. The decision. Minutes stretched into eternity. Ammo dwindled, throats burned, and the enemy kept coming. Harper knew they couldn't hold forever. Then, the distant thump-thump of rotors. The squad's head snapped up. A Black Hawk swept into view, blades flashing in the dawn. Relief surged like electricity. Bird inbound. Vega roared. But Harper saw the trucks below, repositioning, aiming their heavy guns skyward. One lucky burst could shred that chopper before it landed. Her mind raced. They needed a distraction. A sacrifice. She turned to Maddox. You still think compassion gets US killed? His eyes narrowed, sweat streaking his dirt-smeared face. Depends what you've got in mind. She handed him the last smoke grenades. You're with me. We're drawing fire. By the bird time to land. Maddox stared, shock flickering. Then, a slow grin. About damn time you did something reckless. Fire and smoke. They sprinted from cover, tossing smoke grenades in arcs. Clouds of white billowed, masking their movement. Harper fired in rapid bursts, every muzzle flash drawing the enemy's eyes. Bullets whined past, biting into rock, dust exploding at their feet. Keep moving, she shouted, lungs burning. The trucks redirected, heavy guns thundering at their position. The ground shook under the onslaught. Maddox laughed wildly, firing until his rifle clicked empty. You're insane, ma'am? Welcome to leadership. Harper shouted back, reloading. Behind them, through the smoke, the Black Hawk descended. Soldiers scrambled aboard, hauling Colin's body with them. Vega's voice carried faintly, all aboard. Move. Harper glanced at Maddox. Time to go. They sprinted back through the smoke, lungs searing, bullets nipping their heels. The Black Hawk's side door yawned open, Vega waving them in. Harper shoved Maddox aboard, then hauled herself in as the chopper lifted. Bullets streaked past, tracers glowing in the morning light. One round smacked the door frame inches from her head. She ducked, heart hammering. The Black Hawk surged skyward, engines howling. The valley shrank below, enemy fighters shaking their fists in rage. The cost. Inside the chopper, soldiers slumped, pale and shaking. Colin's body lay silent between them. Harper sat against the bulkhead, chest heaving, smoke-streaked and bloodied. Maddox dropped beside her, still grinning despite the chaos. You know, he said, breathless, I think I'm starting to like your kind of leadership. Harper didn't smile. Her gaze drifted to the radio pack they'd recovered, its foreign markings glinting in the light. Someone had betrayed them. And whoever it was, they weren't done. As the Black Hawk carried them toward safety, Harper's eyes hardened. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The desert was never silent. Even in the darkest hours before dawn, when the temperature plunged and frost crept along the sand, the wind carried whispers, echoes of distant artillery, the hum of drones far above, the faint crackle of radios bleeding through static. Sergeant Elena Ramirez knew those whispers all too well. She had learned to separate what was real from what her mind invented in the sleepless hours. Tonight, though, something felt off. The FOB had been on edge ever since Bravo Team's patrol vanished outside the southern perimeter 2 days ago. No radio calls. No distress beacon. Just gone. Command suspected a large insurgent element had moved in, dug tunnels or wired the fields with IED belts. Colonel Briggs had responded with fury and paranoia, doubling patrols and snapping at anyone who so much as breathed wrong in his presence. Elena wasn't afraid of the insurgents. She feared what fear itself was doing to her unit. A shadow in the dark. The alarm klaxon wailed at 0200 hours. Elena bolted upright from her cot, boots half-laced before the words, perimeter breach, even left the PA system. Soldiers scrambled through the barracks like ants under fire, slamming on body armor, grabbing rifles, helmets, night vision goggles. Let's move, Ramirez. Corporal Jackson, always too loud, always too eager, practically shoved her toward the door. The desert night swallowed them whole as they poured into defensive positions along the wire. Searchlights swept arcs of pale light across the sand. Beyond the wire, the dunes shifted like restless seas. Movement 2 o'clock, someone barked. Tracer fire ripped into the night, red and green streaks slicing toward invisible shapes. Elena hit the dirt behind a sandbag wall, rifle steady. She scanned through NVGs, shadows flickered. Figures moved, but never clear enough to identify. Too slow, too deliberate. Not a charge. Something worse. Then the first explosion shook the earth. A section of wire vanished in a storm of dust and fire. Incoming mortars. The world became thunder. Craters bloomed across the FOB's edge. Sirens howled. Elena pressed her face into the sand as dirt rained down. When she looked up, the wire was gone, and with it the illusion of safety. The trap. Colonel Briggs stormed to the front line himself, helmet askew, jaw clenched like stone. "Hold the line," he roared, voice cracking over chaos. "Nobody breaks. They want this base, they'll choke on it first." Elena respected his fire, but her gut twisted. This wasn't a random attack. It was too coordinated. She spotted them first. Not a horde of screaming fighters, but shadows darting low, disciplined, probing gaps. And then she realized the worst. These weren't just insurgents. They had U.S. equipment. NVG's body armor. NATO rifles. "Sir," she shouted over the gunfire. "They're outfitted like contractors. Mercenaries, maybe worse." Briggs didn't even glance at her. "They bleed the same as anyone else. Put them down." But Elena's brain screamed something different. Contractors didn't just show up in the middle of the desert with perfect timing. Somebody had sold them out. The first wave broke through the shredded wire. The night erupted into close-quarters chaos. Muzzle flashes strobing, men screaming, blades flashing as rifles jammed and bayonets came out. Elena fought like a machine, every muscle drilled by years of training. A merc lunged at her with a suppressed MP5. She pivoted, buried her knife under his ribs, shoved him back into the sand. Blood sprayed warm across her cheek. Her hands didn't tremble. Not yet. Breach in the command post. By 0300, the FOB was a ruin of fire and screams. Elena's squad regrouped at the half-collapsed command tent, bodies scattered like broken toys around it. Inside, chaos reigned. Radio screamed useless static. Maps lay scattered. And Briggs stood in the center, red-faced, barking orders that nobody could follow. "We hold. Reinforcements are en route. Air support is 30 minutes out." "Sir," Elena pushed through, voice sharp, "we don't have 30 minutes. They're inside the wire. We need to pull back, regroup at the motor pool." "Out of the question." Briggs bellowed. "This is my base. We die before we give it up." Elena stared at him, chest heaving. Around them, soldiers exchanged looks, silent, broken. They were tired of dying for nothing. The moment stretched, tense as a tripwire. Briggs' hand hovered near his sidearm. Elena realized then, he'd rather shoot his own soldier than admit defeat. The base shook again. An RPG slammed into the far wall, tearing the tent open, burying the colonel's words under dust and fire. When the smoke cleared, Briggs was on the ground, bleeding from a shrapnel wound across his face. And suddenly, everyone looked to Elena. Command falls. "Ramirez," Jackson hissed, eyes wild. "What do we do?" Her throat locked. She wasn't supposed to be in charge. She was just a sergeant. But in that moment, the truth hit her. Leadership wasn't about rank. It was about survival. "Fall back to the motor pool," she said, voice steadier than she felt. "Grab every Humvee that still runs. We're not dying in this sandpit." Soldiers snapped to it. Not because she outranked them, but because she was the only one making sense. As they moved, Elena glanced once at Briggs. He was alive, groaning, clutching his ruined face. Their eyes met, and for the first time she saw not authority but fear. She almost pitied him. Almost. The convoy. They piled into Humvees, engines growling like beasts. The motor pool's floodlights flickered, half destroyed by incoming fire. Mortar rounds thudded nearby, showering the convoy with dirt and shrapnel. "Go, go, go!" Elena barked, climbing into the lead vehicle. The convoy roared through the southern gate, its armored teeth grinding across sand. Behind them, the FOB burned like a funeral pyre. Tracer fire stitched the night sky as mercenaries pursued, pickup trucks bristling with machine guns. The desert became a killing field. Elena braced against the turret mount as Jackson fired the .50 cal, its thunder drowning out her thoughts. Trucks flipped, men scattered, but the enemy kept coming, relentless. And then came the real terror. Explosions erupted ahead, preset charges buried in the sand. The mercenaries had mined the escape routes. The first Humvee hit a blast, flipping end over end in fire. Screams pierced the comms. Elena's convoy ground to a halt, boxed in by fire front and back. They were trapped. Ghosts in the wire. Silence fell for one chilling instant. No gunfire. No shouting. Just the crackle of burning vehicles and the hiss of sand in the wind. And then voices. Not English. Not Arabic. A strange, guttural tongue Elena didn't recognize, echoing from the dunes. Shadows moved at the edges of the light, too fluid, too coordinated for mere mercenaries. Who the hell are these guys? Jackson whispered, eyes wide. Elena swallowed hard, heart thundering. The desert whispered back, mocking her with its silence. She didn't have the answer. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. They weren't fighting a normal enemy anymore. They were in the grip of something darker, something planned. And whatever it was, it wanted them alive. To be continued? Elena sat in the burning desert, rifle gripped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Around her, soldiers waited for orders, eyes haunted by firelight. Somewhere out there, hidden in the night, an enemy neither mercenary nor insurgent prepared to close in. And she felt it deep in her bones. This was no longer about the FOB or even the war. This was about survival against an enemy that had been waiting for them all along. The desert whispered. The shadows moved. And the ghosts in the wire were coming. The encirclement. The desert was lit by fire. Wrecked Humvees burned like torches, oily smoke curling into the star-swept sky. Sergeant Elena Ramirez crouched behind the lead vehicle, her chest heaving, rifle braced against her shoulder. Around her, the remnants of Alpha and Charlie companies clung to the ruins of their convoy. 80 soldiers dwindled to less than 30. They weren't supposed to be alive. By all logic, the mercenaries should have wiped them out in that first ambush. But logic had long since abandoned this war. The voices came again, ghostly through the smoke. Strange, guttural syllables bouncing off the dunes. They weren't shouts of men in chaos. They were commands, crisp, practiced, precise. Eyes up. Elena hissed into her comms. They're trying to spook us. Jackson shifted beside her, sweat streaking the dust on his face. Sarge, they don't need to spook us. They already have us boxed in. He wasn't wrong. To the north, mines and wreckage blocked their retreat. To the south, dunes hid the enemy's advance. East and west stretched nothing but empty desert, and nowhere to run. The first assault. The attack began not with bullets but with light. Green flares screamed into the sky, bursting overhead, painting the battlefield in sickly glow. Shadows leapt across the sand. Then came the first wave. Figures in black, faces hidden by night vision masks, moved with terrifying precision. They didn't scream. They didn't charge. They advanced like phantoms, rifles raised, cutting down soldiers with brutal efficiency. Contact front. Elena roared. Her rifle barked fire, tracers snapping across the glow. One enemy dropped, another rolled and kept advancing. These weren't untrained insurgents. These were professionals. Killers. The firefight became a slaughter. Soldiers screamed as rounds tore through armor. The .50 cal opened up, rattling the dunes, but the gunner was cut down in seconds. Fall back to the rocks. Elena ordered, pointing to a jagged outcrop half buried in the sand. Move, damn it. They sprinted under fire, dragging wounded, stumbling through smoke. Elena fired until her rifle clicked dry, then slammed in a fresh mag without missing stride. Every decision she made in those seconds was survival measured in heartbeats. By the time they reached cover, 5 more soldiers were dead. The survivors huddled behind the rocks, bloodied, terrified, but alive. Briggs returns. Elena turned and froze. Colonel Briggs was there. His face was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, blood soaking through, but his eyes still burned with fury. 2 soldiers had dragged him from the wreckage. Somehow he had survived. You disobeyed my orders, he rasped, voice like gravel. You abandoned the FOB. Elena stared, disbelief and rage boiling in her chest. The FOB was gone. If we'd stayed, none of us would be breathing. Briggs staggered closer, his hand trembling near his sidearm. I should have you shot for treason. Sir, Jackson growled, stepping forward. With respect, if she hadn't taken charge, we'd all be corpses right now. Maybe you ought to shut the hell up and let her lead. Briggs' hand hovered. Soldiers watched, breath held. In that moment, command itself hung by a thread. Elena locked eyes with him, refusing to flinch. You want to waste a bullet on me, fine. But the enemy's coming. Decide if you want to die shooting at your own, or fighting the bastards who actually want us dead. For the first time, Briggs faltered. His hand slipped from the pistol. He slumped against the rock, broken, beaten, not by wounds but by his own pride. The soldiers looked away from him. Their eyes were on Elena now. The last stand. The enemy regrouped, their shadows circling the outcrop. Elena counted at least 30 of them, maybe more. Too many. She checked her ammo, 3 mags left. Not enough. Her radio crackled. Static, then a faint voice. Viper 2, this is Eagle. Air support inbound, 20 minutes out. Hold position. Repeat, hold position. 20 minutes. They didn't have to. Elena tightened her grip on the rifle. All right, listen up, she said, voice firm, carrying through the chaos. We're not going to outgun them. But we can outthink them. We dig in, hit hard, make them pay for every inch. We survive until the birds get here, or we don't survive at all. There was no cheer. No war cry. Just grim nods, teeth clenched, eyes burning with the resolve of soldiers who knew death was already at the door. The next assault came fast. Grenades arced through the air, blasting sand and stone into the air. Shadows poured forward, silent, deadly. Elena met them head-on. Her rifle thundered, each shot precise, every squeeze of the trigger another enemy dropped. Jackson manned the captured .50 cal, mowing down lines of black-clad figures until it jammed. Private Lewis, barely 19, lobbed grenades with shaking hands, his screams drowned in the explosions. The fight was chaos. Elena's ears rang, her shoulder burned from recoil, her throat raw from shouting orders. Every time she thought they'd break, another soldier rallied beside her. But one by one the numbers dwindled. Briggs' choice. In the chaos, a grenade landed near their cover. Elena Dove grabbed it and hurled it back, but too late. The blast tore across the rocks, shrapnel ripping through soldiers. She hit the ground hard, pain stabbing her side. When she pushed up, she saw Briggs. He had a clear shot at an enemy slipping around the flank. His rifle was steady. But his hands shook. Fear froze him. The mercenary raised his weapon, aimed straight at Jackson. Colonel? Elena screamed. Briggs pulled the trigger. The mercenary dropped, skull bursting under the impact. Jackson spun, eyes wide, realizing he was still alive. Briggs lowered the rifle, his breath ragged, tears mixing with blood on his ruined face. For one fleeting second, Elena saw not the arrogant colonel, not the broken man, but a soldier. The airstrike. Minutes stretched into eternity. Bodies littered the sand, smoke choked the air. Elena's ammo was nearly gone when she heard it, the distant roar of engines. Jets streaked across the sky, their afterburners igniting the horizon. Flares rained down like falling stars. Get down? Elena shouted. The airstrike hit like the wrath of gods. Explosions ripped across the desert, fire swallowing the enemy ranks. The ground shook, dunes collapsing under shockwaves. Mercenaries scattered, screams lost in thunder. When the dust cleared, silence reigned. The enemy was gone. Or what remained of them lay in twisted heaps across the sand. The survivors stared in disbelief. Jackson laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. Lewis sobbed into his bloodied hands. Elena just stood there, rifle limp in her grip, ears ringing with the silence of victory. Aftermath. By sunrise, medevac helicopters swept in, their rotors kicking up storms of sand. Medics swarmed the survivors, patching wounds, loading bodies onto stretchers. Elena sat apart from the chaos, helmet in her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. She felt hollow, like her soul had burned out in the night. Briggs approached, bandaged, leaning on a cane. He stopped in front of her, silence heavy between them. You disobeyed orders, he rasped. But you saved them. All of them. Elena looked up, her voice flat. Not all. Briggs flinched. He glanced at the soldiers, the ones alive because of her. Shame weighed on him heavier than his wounds. Finally, he said, you should have been the one giving orders from the start. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the closest a man like him could come. Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. Ghosts in the wire. As the helicopters lifted off, carrying the wounded and the dead, Elena caught movement on the dunes. A figure stood there, just beyond rifle range. Black-clad, masked, silent. Watching. Her heart clenched. She raised her rifle, but the figure didn't move. Didn't retreat. Just raised one hand, slow, deliberate, as if marking her. Then the wind shifted. The figure was gone. Elena lowered the rifle, unease crawling under her skin. The battle was over. But the war, whatever war this truly was, had only just begun. Epilogue. Days later, back at the forward headquarters, Elena sat alone in the mess tent, staring at a tray of untouched food. Her body was healing. The scars would fade. But her mind replayed the flares, the shadows, the guttural commands in the night. Those men hadn't been insurgents. They hadn't been mercenaries either. They were something else. Something trained. Equipped. Sent here with a purpose that went deeper than territory or ideology. And they had marked her. The desert whispered again even within the walls of the HQ. She wondered how long before the ghosts in the wire returned. The end.